Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, Using Data to Strengthen Funding Proposals. Thank you so much for joining today. Uh, my name is Jason Chalmers. I'm the Research and Evaluation Lead at ARAISA. I'm also joined here today by Roxana Fazli, who's the co-founder and CEO of Expertise Hub. Before we really get started, I just want to note that simultaneous interpretation is available in both official languages. Roxanne and myself are going to speak in English today, but you are welcome to listen in and participate and ask questions and join the conversation in either official language of your choice. To do that, there should be a little globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can click on that to toggle between your preferred official language. I'm joining you today from Jabuktuk. You may also know it as Halifax. Jabuktuk means the Great Harbor in the Mi'kmaq language. And Jabuktuk is part of a much larger territory called Mi'kmaqi. So Mi'kmaqi is the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. This region largely overlaps with the Peace and Friendship Treaties. So the Peace and Friendship Treaties were signed between 1725 and 1779. And so they're coming up on 300 years old at this point, but they are still relevant today. They are still in effect right now. And we are all part of these treaties. It doesn't matter how you came to live in this part of the world, whether you're indigenous, whether you're a settler who's been here for several generations, whether you're a newcomer who's been here for just a couple of months. We belong to these treaties, and these treaties belong to us. Depending on where you're joining from today, you might also be joining from the territory of the Wolastoqey, Passamaquoddy, the Beothuk, or the Innu and Inuit of Labrador. I'm going to use this opportunity to showcase a report that we just finalized here at ARAISA. It's called Advancing Reconciliation in the Settlement Sector. And this report explores how our sector is advancing truth and reconciliation. It looks at initiatives, resources that are all across our region, but it also looks at what's happening in other parts of the country. So what is happening across Canada, but especially in Atlantic Canada, to advance truth and reconciliation? What we really argue in this report here is that it's important to do this work in a way that is specific to our sector and specific to our region. I believe strongly that there's potential for a lot of unique conversations between Indigenous peoples and newcomers. There's a lot of possibility there. As sector professionals, we need to understand the distinct challenges and unique opportunities that can come out of those conversations. So the report, just for a few logistical reasons, it is finalized, but we haven't officially promoted it yet, which is why you haven't seen it. It's not on our website, but Renat is dropping a couple of links in the chat, I believe. So you can access the report there if you're interested. You're also welcome to reach out to me or any of my colleagues at ARAISA. We'll make sure that you get a copy of this report. And I hope this is important to you. And as you're reading through the reports, I hope it just gives you some ideas to consider about how your organization can work to advance truth and reconciliation. See what's already happening out there and think, well, how can we build on this? How can we take something from a different region and apply it here? How can we do this work together as a sector and as a region? I hope I'm also allowed to say that we are just finalizing some professional Indigenous ally training. We'll be hosting that training online on March 25th. We're just putting a couple pieces into place, but the invite should be going out soon. So keep an eye out for that as well through email, newsletter, LinkedIn probably. That will be happening March 25th, and it's a really great concrete way that we can all collectively together start working towards reconciliation. So let me just give a quick summary of what it is I'm going to talk about today. So first of all, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time setting the foundation for what we're doing here. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the types of data that are available to us and that we might like to use in funding proposals. And then I'm just going to break down funding proposals in a little bit of detail, see what's actually in a funding proposal. And then once we've kind of set that foundation, then we can really get into the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about here. Then we can really start to talk about how can we actually take this data and integrate it into funding proposals to create proposals that are much more robust and much more evidence-based. So that's where Roxanne and I are going to spend most of our time today. Before we conclude, I'm going to share some tips and tricks that I've learned based on my experience working with data. I'll tell you where to go to find some of the data, and then I'm hoping we have a good 20, 25 minutes at the end for conversation, because I'm not the only expert in the room. I think there are a lot of experts, and so I'm happy to answer questions, but I hope some other folks in the room will be willing to share their expertise as well. So the webinar today, it's really about how we can leverage data when we're writing funding proposals. And my argument, just to be clear right off the bat, my argument is that data can help us to do two very specific things. First of all, data can help us to identify the need for programs and services. And the second thing is that data can help us to explain the impacts or outcomes of our programs and services. But I also want to stress that there's a much broader application to what we're talking about here than just funding proposals. Funding proposals are a great case study because this is typically where we have to explain and justify our work in the most concrete and direct ways. But we need to do this in a lot of other situations as well. For example, when we're reporting, whether it's to funders or the board, sometimes we need to speak to the press. Most of us are working with community partners. And often in these situations, we need to justify why the work we do is so valuable and so important. And so we're talking about funding proposals here today, but we're not just talking about funding proposals. Really, what Roxanne and I are going to be talking about is how data can help to explain why our work really matters. So strong funding proposals, there's a lot of different things you're going to want to consider when you're trying to write the strongest funding proposal possible. You're going to want to look at what the funders are asking about. You're going to just want to make sure it's nicely written, well presented. But you also want to make sure your funding proposals are evidence-based, and this is what we're focusing on today. Let me give you a concrete example of what I mean. So this is an example. I'm pulling this from IRCC's most recent call for proposals, CFP, which I was involved with. Many of my colleagues at ARAISA were involved with. I think many of you out there listening today were also involved with in this call for proposals. And so it's not exceptional in any way, but it's familiar to us. Many of us were there, so we kind of know what it's about. But at the same time, what IRCC is asking for in that is not really any different than what other funding organizations are asking for when they want a proposal. So IRCC was really clear about how our evaluations would be adjudicated. And they said that all of our proposals would be adjudicated based on 4 criteria, whether they're client-centered, outcomes-driven, responsive to needs, and whether they effectively used resources. And under 2 of these, they were clear about how data fits into things. They said that outcomes-driven programming is based on evidence and data. And they also said that there should be a clear need for the project supported by evidence and data. And so this example really does showcase those 2 main ways that data can shape our funding proposals. Data can help to demonstrate the need for our programs and services, and it can also help to demonstrate the impact or the outcomes of our programs and services. So I I do want your feedback. I want to make this a little bit interactive. So I do want your feedback today and throughout the webinar. But first of all, I just want to get a sense of who is in the room with us today. And I want to get a sense of who's in the room by asking what your comfort level is with funding proposals. Gagandeep, could you launch the first poll, please? I hope I'm able to see it even though I'm sharing. Okay, perfect. So what's your comfort level with funding proposals? Would you say you're an expert? Are you good, but you can learn more? Have you only written a couple, or is this totally new to you? I'll just give it another 10 seconds for anybody else to get their responses in. All right, I think that's about good. Do you want to end the poll? And I think it should share the results with us, Raghundeep. Okay, great. That's sharing. I think everybody can see, right? Okay. Okay, so we have actually a good distribution. I wasn't totally expecting this, actually. So we've got one expert in the room. Good. I hope you stick around through the discussion period and maybe offer some insights and share anything that maybe we weren't able to cover on our own. But we do have a range of people who are a pretty even distribution of people who are totally new to funding proposals. Those who've just written a couple and those who have written quite a lot. I think I'm not an expert, but I'm one of you who could who knows a lot but could learn more. I've written quite a few of these, but I'm not a professional grant writer. I'm a professional data person, um, which is kind of my angle on things. So I think I'm hoping that everybody can gain something from this webinar. I've tried to design it in such a way that no matter where you're at, it will give you something that is useful. So I think we can close this poll. Are you, do I need to do that? Do I need to close it to get out of the way? Okay. All right. So let's start with some of the more fundamental stuff. Let's talk about the types of data that we're going to be using in a funding proposal. Because data isn't just one thing. There are many different kinds of data. Each different kind of data, we're going to use it in different ways. And so here are I considered some of the types of data that we'd probably be using in a funding proposal for our sector. One of the main kinds of data is demographic data. So demographic data is data about populations and communities. So typically demographic data helps us to answer questions about who's our potential client populations and what are their characteristics. So this is things like age, gender, location, religious affiliation, education. All of those are demographic characteristics. A lot of this data is publicly available. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but places like Statistics Canada, Open Government, they are a wealth of demographic data that you can use in your funding proposals. Evaluation data is also absolutely essential to doing this kind of work. So evaluation data is data about specific programs or services. It helps us to answer questions like, what are the outcomes or impacts of our programming? So this is typically data that's collected internally by your organization. If you're reporting on eye care, this would be an evaluation type data. I suspect that most or all of you are collecting other kinds of internal evaluation data. I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. Roxanne is going to talk about this in quite a bit more detail. And there's also a lot of other kinds of data and evidence that you can draw on. So things like research reports and policy studies, public opinion polls, all of these can be integrated in order to ensure that you have a really strong funding proposal. when you're deciding what kind of data you're going to want to use, first of all, you really just want to ask what data is available to me. And then once you have figured out what's available, then you start to ask, well, what's going to be relevant for my proposal? So this is the data that we'll use. And we'll dig into this a little bit more. So then now we need to break down what a funding proposal actually looks like. And like I'm glad that maybe a third of the people in the room are actually new to this. So I think maybe I'm hoping this will be of value to you as well. Because it's worth thinking about what we are actually including in a funding proposal. Because every funder, every funding stream, every funding opportunity is going to have different application criteria. You're going to be submitting a lot of different things. You're going to be submitting a budget in various levels of detail. You're going to have supporting documents from your own organization, from your partner organizations, all sorts of stuff. But usually at the core of a funding proposal is some kind of narrative description of the project or program or service that you're asking money for. And this is what we're focusing on today, because in my opinion, this is really the heart of the proposals. This is what brings together all those pieces. It's this narrative description that makes sense of the budget, that makes sense of all the supporting documents, and really creates an integrated and cohesive proposal. The length of this can vary considerably. You might have 200 words to state your case. You might have 20 pages. Regardless of how long it is, though, every funding proposal should have a few key things. First of all, every proposal should start with a short, clear, detailed summary of the project or the program that you're asking money for. This should be 1 to 3 sentences maximum, regardless of the length of your proposal. So if it's a short proposal, you got a couple hundred words, try to do it in 1 sentence. Even if you have a longer proposal, say you have 15 or 20 pages, you should still aim to do this within 2 or 3 sentences. And I will admit that this is partly just my philosophy. Not everybody writes a funding proposal in this way. Um, you're, you can still get funding otherwise. I've seen funding proposals get funded, doing it other ways. But really, my philosophy is that your reviewer should understand everything they need to know within those first couple of sentences. Everything else you're doing in your proposal is just expanding on your plan. You're going to add details throughout, but you're not going to add new ideas. And the reason for this is that your reader spends most of their time on those first few sentences, most of their attention, really. If you've ever reviewed applications like this, you know that at the beginning, you're paying full attention. You're giving it your full attention as you read those first couple of sentences. But as you go on, your attention may begin to wander. You may start to skim over top of what you're reading a little bit more. And so you pay less and less attention as you go. So by front loading your proposal in this way, it's really just a way of helping your reviewer read your proposal more easily and effectively. The second thing you need is a problem or need statement. So what is the problem that you plan to address by providing your program or service? Because yes, we're in the business of care, we're in the business of support, but we're really in the business of problem solving. Newcomers come to our organizations because they face some kind of challenge or obstacle to settlement and integration. It could be difficulty communicating in the local language. It might be not knowing how to write a resume in the Canadian style. It might be something like need for support with childcare. What we need to do in these proposals is to identify and demonstrate that there's some kind of problem in order to justify why our program or service is needed. Then you can start to explain and describe your intervention. So what's your plan to address the problem? What are you actually proposing to do about this? So this is where you would describe the program or service. You might want to explain why it's appropriate to the need if that's not clear. You can describe some of the expected impacts or outcomes here. And then you can start to fill in those details about what you're going to do. So specifically, how are you going to implement this? And this is really just this place to start to build the logistics into things. So it might be, going through your timeline. What's the frequency that you're going to deliver this? What's your outreach strategy? What are your target numbers? These kind of things. And really giving these details just helps to make your proposal feel more feasible and well thought out. So far, um, this is probably feeling somewhat abstract. So let's make it a little bit more concrete for you. So here is an example proposal that I wrote just as an example today. It's a fictional program. It is a fictional service provider. Um, but this is also the kind of program that many of us do deliver or could be delivering. So I hope this makes sense, but just to be clear, this is not real. So we begin with that short descriptive summary sentence. SPO PEI will deliver an after-school program for refugee youth to support academic learning and prepare youth for the Canadian workforce. There, that really says it all. Now we can go into our needs statement. Refugee youth can face multiple barriers to integration based on their age and immigration experience. These barriers can include lack of education or work experience, small social circles, and limited fluency in English or French. Okay then, so what are we going to do about it? SPO PEI will develop and deliver a 10-week after-school program to help refugee youth better prepare for academic and employment success. The program has three core components: facilitated learning about Canadian education and employment, presentations from local employers and post-secondary institutions, and independent work time to do homework while practicing English or French and connecting with peers. Now we can just start to fill it out with some of the details. 15 clients will be selected for the program based on internal needs assessment. The program will run weekly for 3 hours during the school term, and it will be facilitated by two frontline staff. The program will be hosted in person at our downtown location, although virtual participation will be available to clients in rural and remote areas. All right, so before we move on, I would like to get your feedback again. So now that we've kind of thought a little bit about what goes into a funding proposal, I want to know, what part of the funding proposal are you finding most challenging, or are you likely to find most challenging? So Gagandeep, could you launch the second poll, please? Excellent. So what do you find most challenging in doing this work? Is it the summary, that problem or need statement, the project description, or the project details? So let's just take 30 seconds or so to give everybody a chance to respond. Let's just do another 10 or 15 seconds here. I think we're about where we're going. Okay, I think we're about there. Would you mind ending the poll and sharing the results? Perfect. Okay, that's a really nice distribution there. I think all of us find different things challenging, and I didn't actually give you the chance to select multiple options, but it's pretty evenly divided. And the fewest people actually have problems with that project description, which makes sense because often that is the program itself. We know our program, so unless we're inventing something new, it shouldn't be quite as challenging to write that project description. The summary, the summary is hard because it's short. The need statement is hard um, because it's really hard, and the project details, yeah, because you really, especially if it's for a project you don't already know, like the description and details. If it's a new project, that becomes a lot harder to figure out. Okay, so I think we can stop sharing and move on to the next bit there. So I'm just going to jump back in my slides. So just going back to here. So in 150 words, I think this is a pretty nice description of a proposed program that I think most of our organizations could actually realize. But you may have noticed that there is one crucial flaw in this proposal. I've got all the right pieces, all the right places, but the major issue is that I have absolutely no evidence to support anything I've said here. There's no data to support anything. I'm just proposing something based on very little. So then, how can we actually begin to get data into this to make it a more robust proposal? And for those of you who have challenges with that need statement, this is where things really start to come together. Because data is really great when it comes to defining the problem or defining the need for your programs and services. And I think this is really challenging because we often overlook the need statement when we're doing this kind of work. And this is because as professionals, we typically have a very good understanding of what those needs are based on our professional and often lived experience. If you are working with clients day in and day out, or you're managing people who are working with clients day in and day out, you know what their challenges are, you know what obstacles they're facing, it's obvious to you. It might not be obvious to the funder, it might not be obvious to the person reviewing your application. They just might not have the professional or personal experience that you have. And so you need to spell it out, and data is a really great way to start to spell this out for your reviewers. It helps to make an abstract problem feel more concrete. So demographic data is really great here. Demographic data, it can do a lot of things. Demographic data, you can use it to define or describe the population that you're working with or planning to work with. You can also use it in the same way to compare different populations. Once you start to compare populations, you can actually start to identify inequities between those populations, amongst other things. You know, data does a lot, but these are kind of the main things you might start to think about. Evaluation data, also very useful here. You can use your evaluation data to describe your service users. So who's using your services? When are they using your services? How many people are using your services? And so on. You can also use it to identify gaps in your service delivery. And you can also compare service outcomes. So you compare service outcomes for different populations or for different programs, which can further help to identify gaps in service delivery, amongst other things. So there's a lot of potential here. Finding the right data, though, is really hard. Um, I don't have a specific methodology to get you to the right data. I can't say do A, B, and C, and you're going to get to the right data. But you might be here because you want that ABC. So I tried to put together some considerations. So this isn't like a strict methodology or anything like that, but these are things that you might want to consider when you start looking for the data that you're going to need. First of all, just define your client population in as much detail as possible. Be as specific as possible here. Once you've defined your client population, make some observations about that client group based purely on your professional experience. Don't start looking at the data yet. Just make some observations based on what you already know as a sector professional. Who's walking through your door? Once you've made those observations, then start digging around for the data. Demographic data, evaluation data, whatever seems most relevant. And then once you start going through the data, start to pull out that data that's actually going to support your professional observations and you think is going to actually help strengthen this proposal that you're writing. So just drawing on the example, I'm going to keep using this example throughout today. How might we do this within the example that we had before? So let's define our client group. We're talking about refugee youth on Prince Edward Island. So this is very specific because we actually have 3 descriptive criteria here. So refugee population. So that's the admission or what is the word? I've lost the word. Refugees status. Then you have youth. So that's a demographic feature. And then Prince Edward Island. So that's location. Now, if you work at our fictional SPO PEI, you might meaningfully make an observation like, well, many of the refugees who are admitted to PEI are children and youth. That could be something that you observe just based on paying attention to who's coming into your offices. Now you can start to go look for that data. And this, I'll admit, is the tricky bit because you have to kind of know where to go for that data. So I can tell you open government is a great resource. Again, I'll talk about that in a little bit. I happen to know that open government has a lot of data. They have a portal on resettled refugees. I can go in there and pull out a ton of data on resettled refugees. And I did that, and this is something I pulled out. So based on the data that I found, I can say that for all refugees admitted to PEI between 2015 and 2025, nearly half, 47%, were aged 17 years and under at the time of admission. This is a fact. This is actual data. If you were looking through your evaluation data, you might say something like, for all refugees who use services at SPO PEI in 2025, whatever percent were aged whatever years and under. I didn't want to put numbers in here because this is fictional, but I think your organization could probably pull out something quite comparable to what's being said here. So now let's take what we found here. Let's put it into our proposal. So this is the same proposal that we had before. The bolded section is our need statement, and the orange is what I've added. Everything else, the white and the yellow, that is unchanged. I haven't changed anything from before. So I start with the introduction, and then for all refugees admitted to PEI between 2015 and 2025, nearly half were aged 17 years and under at the time of admission. Refugee youth can face multiple barriers to integration based on their age and immigration experience. These barriers can include lack of education or work experience, small social circles, and limited fluency in English or French. So what I've done here, I've cited some data from Open Government. I've cited an existing research report that supports what I was already saying in this example. And you can see that very little has actually changed from what we had previously, but it's already a much stronger need statement. And with a much stronger need statement, it is a much stronger proposal already. We've added, what, 15 words, but already this is considerably improved. We are saying here, objectively, refugee youth are a significant newcomer population in the province, and we know that they face unique challenges. And so we're going to provide a service that addresses their unique experiences and lived realities. At this point, maybe some of you are having flashbacks to CFP. Maybe it's starting to feel overwhelming. Maybe you're starting to think, funding proposals are so much work. Can I just get AI to do it for me? Well, yes, I will allow that. You can get AI to do it for you. That's fine. Well, you can get AI to assist you in doing it in some specific ways. So we can use AI to write funding proposals. We can use it in the same way we're already using it for a lot of different things. We can use it to proofread what we've written. We can use it to enhance clarity. We can use it to rewrite something in plain language or rewrite for a specific audience. But specifically when we're writing funding proposals, we can use AI to point us towards data or data sets that are going to be useful to us. So, and I want to be really clear here. We should use it to point us in the right direction and help us to find the data that's going to be useful. We're going to ask it where to find the data. So I just gave you some example prompts here. So you might say, I'm writing a funding proposal on whatever. What data can I use to understand the context or define client needs? Even simpler prompt, provide a list of available data or resources on whatever. You can see I'm asking it to point me towards specific data. But what I'm not asking it to do, or I'm asking it to point me towards the data, where I might find that data. I'm not asking it for the specific data itself. Don't ask it to generate the specific data because I can almost guarantee it's going to be wrong. This is just one of the one of the big limitations of AI is that AI is probabilistic. When you ask AI for an answer, it's going to give you an answer based on what's over here, while completely ignoring what's over here. So AI is not very good at generating specific,
Wow.
accurate. Oh, okay. So AI is not very good at generating specific, accurate data or information, but it is really great at synthesizing things and pointing you in the right direction. Before I move on, I just want to, whenever I talk about AI, I would like to just offer a caveat. Uh, be very cautious about providing any kind of confidential data to AI platforms. So, for example, don't ask ChatGPT to analyze your internal evaluation data. Don't give it all your internal records and ask it to write a report for you or whatever. AI typically isn't required to treat your data confidentially. So unless you have some kind of specific agreement with the company, just don't give it your confidential information. So um, that's just my warning that I like to offer whenever I'm talking about this. So at this point, I would like to turn over the microphone to Roxana Fazli. Roxana is the co-founder and CEO of Expertise Hub Cooperative, which is a member-owned social enterprise advancing labor market integration for internationally trained professionals. She's also a sociology PhD student at Memorial University, where she brings an interdisciplinary lens to workforce development, equity, and systems change. Her work focuses on foreign credential recognition, inclusive labor market design, and the social and solidarity economy as a pathway for transforming immigrant employment outcomes. She's been recognized for her leadership and impact, including being named Star Cooperator of the Year by the Newfoundland and Labrador Federation of Cooperatives during the International Year of Cooperatives, as well as for her contributions to advancing equity work. So, Roxana, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Jason, for the introduction. Do you hear me well? Perfect. Hello to everyone joining us today. I would also like to acknowledge that I am speaking from the traditional territory of the Beothuk and the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk peoples, colonially known as St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. I'll start with a brief overview of what it means to collect data through an intersectional lens, especially when working with marginalized communities. When we collect data in these contexts, we need approaches that are contextual, relational, and aware of the power dynamics. Data does not exist in a vacuum, and we need to acknowledge that it reflects people's lived realities. So, this is where intersectionality becomes very important. Intersectionality helps us avoid what we call single axis thinking, where we treat identity categories like being a woman, newcomer, youth, or people with disabilities as if they are homogeneous groups. Intersectionality asks who is missing when, for example, we treat women, newcomers, youth, or people with disabilities as single categories. When we say data collection should have an intersectional lens, it means that if you are asking whether accessing a service is accessible, you should know what service, accessible to whom, under what conditions, at the intersection of what identities and constraints. Is it accessible to an immigrant woman? Is it accessible to an immigrant woman with 3 children? An immigrant woman with 3 children who has limited access to adequate transportation and childcare options, who lives in an insecure housing situation or living in a domestic violence situation, has temporary immigration status, and perhaps an invisible disability. So we should make sure we have thought about all of this when designing our surveys. Are we using an already established analytical structure? Are we using a standard survey based on previous projects or available templates? Or we use AI to get a template for our surveys? So, one outcome of our first-hand experience working directly with marginalized communities is that we are, uh, I'm still on the previous slide, Jason. Thank you. We are often able to challenge funders' data collection frameworks and bring forward the knowledge we gain from project participants to inform funders and advocate for policy change. So here I draw on Kimberly Crenshaw's work on the marginalization of Black women. She argues that problems of exclusion cannot be solved simply by including Black women within an already established analytical structure, because the intersectional experience is greater than the sum of racism and sexism, and the experience of oppression as a woman and the experience of oppression as a Black individual are not separate and independent from each other. So, according to her, an analysis that does not take intersectionality into account cannot sufficiently address the particular manner in which Black women are subordinated. So, if our methods do not fit people's realities, such as their literacy level, trust situation, language, or safety, then the gap we think we found and identified might just be a measurement problem. And next slide, please. So here's an example, just to make it more understandable and concrete. Imagine administrative data shows lower reported domestic violence cases among immigrant women. So, an abrupt conclusion can be there is less domestic violence in immigrant families. But did we actually measure fear of deportation, financial dependency, how financially dependent a woman may be on her partner, which can strongly affect whether she reports violence or not. Language barriers, community stigma. Sometimes an individual may even question whether what they are experiencing is violence or simply a cultural difference, because definitions of violence can be different across communities, or lack of access to culturally competent shelters, for example, or lack of legal knowledge about rights and available protections, lack of safe housing alternatives. For example, if they live in a violent situation, is there actually a safe place where they can live? Is there any alternative for them? So when we consider these factors, we see that low reporting may not indicate lower violence. It may instead reflect higher barriers to reporting. Next slide, please. So, if intersectionality helps us ask better questions about data, the next question becomes, how do we design research processes that actually capture these complex realities? One important approach to use is community-based participatory research. Community-based participatory research, or CBPR, shifts research away from an extractive model where researchers collect data from communities towards a partnership model where the researcher and the participant co-develop the data. In CBPR, participants are actively involved in all aspects of the research process. Community members help define the research questions, shape the tools, interpret findings, and guide actions. This is not consultation after the fact, instead, it is a co creation process. But why does this matter? Because It improves relevance, it reduces harm, and it increases validity, not in a statistical sense only, but in a contextual sense, because people can correct your assumptions in real time. When we work with marginalized communities, assumptions are often the biggest source of distortion. So, CBPR creates mechanisms to challenge those assumptions or biases. I make an example. Going back to the example of studying low reporting of domestic violence, a community based participatory research approach will involve interviewing women directly, exploring how they define safety, understanding their perception of reporting, recognizing that reporting may not necessarily lead to protection, emphasizing multiple lived realities, or considering power structures so they can examine how immigration law creates vulnerability, analyze how power structures silence women, question how institutions reinforce inequality, ask who benefit from underreporting. So overall, what CBPR allows us to do is make sure that our data collection is grounded in context and lived realities. Instead of relying on single axis categories or assumptions, it helps us consider the different social, structural, and personal factors that shape people's experiences. And most importantly, the data is not only designed by researchers or institutes, it is informed by communities who are most affected by the issue. And this helps us ensure that what we collect, how we interpret it, and the conclusions we draw actually reflect people's realities rather than reproducing simplified or incomplete narratives. So next slide, please. Now, what are the key principles of community-based research if we want to use CBPR? So we need to be familiar with the key principles of this approach. CBPR recognizes community as a unit of identity. Community is characterized by a sense of identification and emotional connection to other members. Common symbol systems, shared values and norms, mutual, although not necessarily equal, influence, common interests, and commitment to meeting shared needs. So, for example, a city or other geographic areas may not be a community in this sense of the term, but rather an aggregate of people who do not share a common identity or may contain several different and overlapping communities of identity within its boundaries. Community based approaches tend to strengthen a sense of community through collective engagement. So, for example, community based participatory research builds on strengths and resources within the community. This may include skills, and assets of individuals, network of relationships, characterized by trust and lived experience of individuals. So it facilitates collaborative partnerships in all phases of the research. A collaborative partnership in which all parties participate as equal members and share control over all phases of the research process. Community-based participatory research integrates knowledge and action for mutual benefit of all partners. There is a commitment to use the research result with the intention that all involved partners will benefit. It promotes a co-learning and empowering process that attends to social inequalities. Researchers involved with community-based research acknowledge the inequalities between themselves and community participants and the ways that these inequalities among community members may shape their participation and influence in collective research and action. CBPR includes a cyclical and iterative process. This process includes partnership development, needs assessment, development of research methodology, data collection, data analysis, action, policy implications, and dissemination of results, collective reflection, and feedback. So, for example, if a knowledge sharing event about equity that only includes researcher or organizational representative, it is not truly considered an inclusive or DEI space. The voices of people most affected by the initiatives are missing at this conversation. And to make this space inclusive, community members must be invited to participate and share their perspectives. So, with all this in mind, how can we use methods that identify real gaps and are relevant to the context of our research, especially when working with marginalized communities, to make sure the data collection method is inclusive and context dependent, and we can discover something new as our project idea and push for change? Next slide, please. So, one important point when working with marginalized communities is that we should not automatically default to surveys simply because they are efficient or easy to administer. Efficiency should not drive the choice of method. Instead, we need to select data collection approaches that fit the realities of people's lives and the context of the research. The method we choose should depend on several factors. The purpose of the research, the context of the community, and the sensitivity of the topic we are studying. For example, one method can be semi structured interviews. Semi structured interviews are often very effective when we are exploring sensitive issues, complex life pathways, or situations involving power dynamics. Semi structured interviews allow participants to share their experiences in their own words while still providing enough structure to guide the conversation. They can also be designed using trauma informed principles, which means ensuring participants feel safe, respected, and in control of what they choose to share. Another method can be focus groups or story circles. Focus groups are very useful when we want to understand community norms, shared barriers, and collective experiences. They allow participants to build on each other's perspective and reveal patterns that may not emerge in individual interviews or conversations. But focus groups are not always appropriate for highly sensitive topics. For example, discussions involving immigration status, fears, or stigmatized experiences. They may require additional safeguards. And in these cases, we might design smaller and more homogeneous groups and work with trusted facilitators and clearly explain confidentiality limits. Another method can be community mapping. often used as part of participatory needs assessment. And in this method, community members help visually map their environment, and this might include identifying available services, barriers to access, safe spaces, transportation challenges, or areas where resources are missing. This approach also helps researchers understand how people actually navigate systems in their daily lives. Uh, Peer research also often increases participation because people may feel more comfortable sharing experiences with someone who understand their context and lived realities. It also help reduce the risk of extractive research where data is taken from communities without meaningful involvement. And we also need to talk about trust for people coming from countries where surveillance or repression is a common reality. A survey can feel like a trap. If participation feels risky for people, the data you collect will be biased because only people who feel safe will answer. And this means we must design our research ethically and ensure it is grounded in community realities. And we, for example, collecting minimum necessary identifiers, anonymous low identifying data when possible, or use community advisory boards to guide wording, recruitment, and interpretation, offer oral consent, plain language consent, and interpreter options, and be transparent. What's collected, why it is collected, who will see it, how long it is kept, and what happens if someone declines to participate in the research. And build return of results, share finding back in accessible format, and don't just extract. Next slide, please. Um, so when we present statistical trends, community validated themes, and intersectional breakdowns, we are signaling three things to funders. First, we say the problem is real. Second, the need is documented. Third, the intervention is informed by evidence. Instead of saying, for example, we believe newcomers in our community need support for having their foreign credentials recognized, we show survey data from 124 responses and three focus groups identified credential recognition, informal hiring networks, and childcare access as the top systemic barriers. This reduces guesswork, and funders are much more comfortable investing when the need is clearly demonstrated. Layered data also demonstrates legitimacy. It shows that the program was not designed in isolation. Instead, the community helped shape the intervention, and the proposal reflects lived realities. This helps answer an important question funders often have in mind. Is this solution imposed or is it co designed with the community? When proposals demonstrate community engagement and consultation, it shows community buy-in and participatory governance. For example, a proposal might say, our program design integrates insight from 18 stakeholder consultation and ongoing community feedback loops. This signals that the initiative is grounded in real community input, which strengthens credibility, especially in equity focused funding streams. Layered data also creates urgency. Quantitative data, like survey responses, for example, help funders understand the scale of the issue. Qualitative data helps them understand the lived experiences behind those numbers. Numbers show how many people are affected, while thematic insights explain how and why those patterns exist. And together they demonstrate that the issue is not random hardship, but a structural challenge that needs to be addressed. Funders also often reject proposals that feel too broad or insufficiently grounded in evidence. And layered data allows us to design targeted, precision based interventions grounded in documented patterns. For example, instead of proposing a general employment program, we might say our intersectional analysis revealed that immigrant women with caregiving responsibilities experience labor market delays of 12 to 18 months. This insight allows us to design targeted responses such as childcare supported professional training programs, flexible or hybrid bridge programs, employer partnerships, offering part time professional placement, or stipend supported mentorship models, for example. Um, Now, the intervention is not generic, it is a structured response to a documented and measurable pattern. And finally, layered data helps us connect research findings with measurable outcomes. For example, if our focus groups reveal that repeated job rejection causes participants to lose confidence, this tells you the problem is not just skill or credentials. It is also confidence and motivation. And we can design outcomes such as increased professional self efficacy scores, increased job application rates after 3 months, increased employer interview callbacks. So, this alignment between problem identification, program design, and impact measurement is what transforms a proposal from a compelling narrative into an evidence informed funding case. So far, we've talked about collecting and interpreting data. The next step is integrating that data to define outcomes and impact. And I'll now pass it over to Jason to walk us through that process.
Thank you so much, Roxana. Those are really those are really great considerations when we're collecting any kind of when we're doing evaluation, collecting evaluation data, or any other kind of internal data that we're collecting at our organization, because that's the data we have control over. That's the data that we can make decisions about. Um, Sorry, just fixing my windows here. When it comes to StatsCan data, we can't control how they're collecting data. We can't control open government data, but we can control the data that we're collecting. And it's important to be collecting it in a way that is responsive to the actual needs of those people who we're working with. So how can we go about using that? And I think this is really the second way that data can help to strengthen our proposals, uh, which is to help to define the outcomes or the impact of the work we're doing. And this is evaluation data is what this is for. That's what it's for. Um, every program, I'm certain, is tracking some kind of data. You're collecting some kind of data for every program or service that you have, and even very, very simple data can help to showcase the impact of what we're doing. So it might be something like the percentage of clients who reported increased confidence, or the percentage of clients who found a job within 6 months, or even just the percentage who graduated to the next language level. It doesn't have to be complicated. Um, it is going to depend on the particular program or service that you're proposing or talking about. If you're looking to extend or continue an existing program, just use evaluation data that you already have from previous years. Um, Even if it's not from the most recent year, even if it's from 2 or 3 years back, it's still good. Even if you're making changes to the program, you can still use that evaluation data to demonstrate the impact of that program. If you're proposing a new program, you can still use evaluation data from similar or related programs. It doesn't have to be a perfect fit. You can draw on existing research or evaluation reports. Um, it just has to be similar enough that you can make meaningful inferences. Don't worry about finding the data that is the perfect fit for what you're doing. So I don't have any particular examples for this example here, but I did try to build in something that could be said, that the kind of data that might be collected in this kind of funding proposal. So we're back here at our original proposal. And the orange is everything we've added since the beginning. And just now, I've just added in just a couple of very short sentences at the end that consider everything from an evaluation perspective. So existing data demonstrates the positive impact of after-school programming for participants of SPO PEI's current homework club for newcomer youth. Whatever percent of participants reported increased confidence in themselves and their academic abilities. And so we can assume that from whatever data is already being collected here, that's relevant and comparable, probably we can make similar findings for other programs. And so, already like we haven't added very much through going out here. The first bit, we've added some demographic data. At the end, we've added some evaluation data. And then that brief little citation there, we've added existing research that supports what we're already saying. We haven't done a lot, but it is a much more robust proposal already. And this is really the power of data, and the power of data, doing data simply, I think, too. So I want to get your feedback once more. Now that we've kind of thought through all of that, we've thought through different kinds of data, what they might look like within a funding proposal. I want to get a sense of what data are you most likely to be using in your funding proposal. So Gagandeep, could you please launch the third poll? Um, So what data are you most likely to be using? Is it going to be demographic data, evaluation data, research policy and other reports? Or after all of this, are you just not even going to bother with evidence anymore? Let's just give it another 10 or 15 seconds in case anybody wants to jump in there with another response. All right, I think we can end that and share the results. Well, I'm glad that people are going to bother with evidence. I'm glad that nobody's giving up on writing evidence-based proposals. That's good to see, and a somewhat pretty even distribution between different kinds of data. And I think realistically, that's probably just because I only let you pick one option. If I let you pick multiple options, you might have picked all three of those. Demographic data is great because it's readily available, and it really is really great for identifying those needs and describing the communities that we work with. Evaluation data is great because it's our data. We know it. We've created it and collected it. And existing reports are great because they can really kind of help substantiate what we're doing without having to dig through without having to like dig through miles of spreadsheet, basically. Um, so thank you for providing your feedback again. I think we can close that. Yeah. So I said I would share some tips that I've come up with based on my experience as a researcher, my experience working with data. I've I framed these around funding proposals and how you might do this within a funding proposal, but really this is anytime you're working with data. Anytime you're working with data, I think these are kind of tricks that can help use that data in an effective way. First of all, remember that you are telling a story, and everything you put into that proposal is going to help tell that story. Data isn't going to be the story itself, but it helps to communicate that narrative. So this really means that we do need to be a little bit strategic about data. Don't dump in data just because it's there, just to make it look beefier. It's not going to help. Find the right data and make sure it actually does fit in with what you're trying to tell. Related to that is I would strongly advise against data dumping. So this might mean different things in different disciplines. In the social sciences, which is my background, data dumping is basically when you give your audience way too much data all at once. Usually when you're doing this, it's uninterpreted data. You haven't fully analyzed it. Um, so the effect is it just overwhelms your audience. So I would strongly advise against doing this. My own personal philosophy is that when you're working with data, less is more. Don't just throw in a bunch of data. Don't just have a bunch of numbers. Nobody's going to pay attention to it. If you carefully integrate one or two little pieces of data into your proposal or your report or whatever it is you're working about, that can be way more effective and impactful for your reader than a ton of data. Especially if it's a short proposal, one or two pieces of data, all you need. Even if it's longer, still, you can add a little bit more, but don't go overboard. And the last tip is really that you have to work with what you got. I've seen this so much as a researcher. We sometimes have this idea of the perfect data that's going to support everything we're saying. It's going to tie it all together. Chances are that data is not going to be available. It might not even exist. When you're working with data, there is rarely going to be this magic bullet that solves everything. So you have to work with the data that is available to you. The way I would encourage you to do this is not to think about your data as proof. Your data does not prove anything. Rather, your data is evidence that you're using to build a case to support your arguments. So don't spend your time, don't waste a bunch of hours looking for the perfect piece of data that you have created in your mind. Go out, find the relevant data, find what's accessible, find what's available, and then pull out the data that's going to best tell the story that you want to tell. So I said that I would kind of help you to find the data that's going to support you. Um, Before I go to specific examples, I just want to point out that we did do a webinar about a year ago that was called Immigration Data 101. And in this webinar, we went in detail. We had a detailed look at immigration related data. We basically spent an hour in a deep dive looking at how to find data, what kind of data is out there, how is it going to be useful to you. So if that's what you want, check out the recording. We basically spend an hour just going into a ton of detail about that data. But I can help point you in the right direction. So here's a few resources that are going to be really, really valuable to you. Open Government is a great resource. I rely on it all the time. So Open Government has a lot of different data sets in there. I'm usually spending my time in IRCC's portal. So if you go into Open Government and IRCC's portal there, they have a ton of data on permanent and temporary residents. It's disaggregated in a variety of different ways. So for province or CMA, which is very important and relevant when we're serving particular communities and regions. It's also disaggregated by gender and age and language and all sorts of different ways. This is really good data because it's typically quite up to date. Usually it's up to date within 2 or 3 months. So if you want the data from last quarter, this is your shop. This is where you're going to go. Statistics Canada is also a really valuable resource. They have a lot of data, a lot of different kinds of data, a lot of data about a different thing. So they have subject portals, basically. So you click on the subjects and you can go in and look at data on a number of different subjects. So they do have a portal on immigration and ethnocultural diversity. It's a useful portal, but their immigration-related data is scattered all across these portals. So there are portals on population and demography, business performance and ownership, languages, health. All of these do contain some kind of immigration-related data. So it can be a bit more digging, but you can also find a lot of really useful stuff in there. They have a lot of different aggregated data sets if you actually want to play around with the numbers themselves. So they have census data, they have the longitudinal immigration database, so the IMDb. They have some other interactive data sets, but they also have interpreted, analyzed data. So they have reports, and these are great if you don't want to dig around in the data and you just want to read something and get a quick summary of what's relevant to you. But we at ARAISA want to also make this as easy as possible for you. Um, and we do this in a number of different ways. So one of these is the Atlantic Immigration Spotlight on Data. So this is a series of reports that we create at ARAISA specifically for you, specifically for service providers in Atlantic Canada. Each of these spotlights is typically 2 to 3 pages, so it shouldn't take more than 5 or 10 minutes of your time to get through. They're very simple. We usually share 1 or 2 really key pieces of data. Usually we're pulling this from Open Government or StatsCan. We don't just give you the data, we interpret it for you, and we explain very concretely how it can inform your programs and services. So we've been doing this for a couple years now. We have them on newcomer children and youth, immigration and population growth, service use amongst refugees, countries of origin, retention. We've got one coming out in a couple of weeks on business ownership amongst immigrants. So if you're looking for that data and you're in this meeting, I think this is a really great place to start because this is what it's designed for. This is why we have created these. It very likely has the data that you need. You can probably go in here, find the one on, newcomer children and youth. Probably it's got data that you wanted. Even if it doesn't have the specific data you wanted, it can point you towards what's there. So you might not want a particular retention data that we pulled out, but you can go into that database of retention data and pull out or find the data that's going to be relevant to you. For those of you who said you want to rely on existing research and policy reports, we also have a library at ARAISA. This is a database of existing research that we have curated. So we haven't written everything here. We haven't created everything here, but we have curated it specifically for you. So these are existing research reports. Everything in here is going to be open access. It all focuses on immigration, and in some ways, everything in here is relevant to Atlantic Canada. So I think I updated it recently. We have 200-ish resources in here. It's searchable by keyword, so if you can go in, you can type in New Brunswick or retention or LGBT and get everything that has those keywords. But we've also curated it by theme. You can browse by theme. So we have, for example, a category on youth. You can click on youth to get all the relevant resources on youth. You can click on gender and sexuality, get all the relevant resources. And so again, this is something that we have created specifically for you to do the work that you're doing more effectively and in a more evidence-based way. So actually, before jumping into comments, I'm just going to stop sharing. Before opening up for conversation and questions, I actually want to suggest something because we love data. We collect data. We try to get data. We try to get your feedback on everything we do. I'm wondering, Rena, could you please pop in the post-event survey? Yes, thank you. And I'm putting this here because I know that sometimes the question period is when people start to need to duck out. And I would really, really appreciate it if you could give some feedback right now or after the meeting. Shouldn't take more than 2 or 3 minutes. And this really does inform what we do at ARAISA and how we do it. We read your responses. My colleague Olivia, I believe she read through 123 responses. and that is informing the work that she's doing now. Um, so I just want to point that out there before people start heading off. We'll also send this out in an email. We'll follow up with an email with the slides and the post-event survey. So please take 2 or 3 minutes and just give us your data, because we love to do things in an evidence-based way, and this is one of the ways that we do that. So I'm happy to just open it up to questions. Victoria, do we have any questions in the chat at the moment?
No, we do not.
No questions in the chat. Okay. Would anybody like to, you can pop your questions in the chat. You can also come off mute if you'd like to ask a question. Roxanne and I are here to support that. I see somebody's connecting to audio. I don't know if that means that you're speaking. Also, I mean, and if you don't have any questions, if there's anybody in here who has um, some insights that they're willing to share. I mean, this is a space of shared learning and shared knowledge. Um, if there's something that we haven't given enough time to, or we just have totally elided over, please share your expert insights. We are happy to do that. Oh, I didn't realize we're actually so close to 3:30. Oh, all right. Well, I'm not seeing. Let's just give it another minute. We can all sit here and quietly meditate for another minute, just to see if there's any questions popping up. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad this was useful. If it was useful, please do share your feedback in the survey. If you hated it, please share your feedback in the survey. If you thought, please share your feedback in the survey. We want to know. We do. And also, if there's particular directions that you would like us to take this kind of work, whether it's the resources we provide to you or events like this where we actually share our insights. Um, we want to know that, because that absolutely guides us in terms of making our decisions. All right. Well, I'm going to say last call for questions, comments. Roxana, did you have anything you would like to share as a final note?
No, I'm just happy. I'm just reading the comments in the chat. I'm so happy everyone found the presentation useful.
Well, I think we can call it a wrap then. Thank you so much to Roxana. Thank you so much to the ARAISA team. Thank you so much for everybody who attended. Maybe I'll see some of you at Metropolis next week. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.